So this is part 2, and we're going to talk about presentation sequencing. In this case, there are 9, I'm going to call it events of instruction. And we're going to touch base on a lot of these as we walk through it. But gaining the attention, is the audience or your trainees receptive? Informing learners of the objectives. So just as I told you what our objectives for this session are, you need to establish the expectation level of the learners. You need to simulate recall of prior learning where possible. It's retrieval is the possibility, or is the event. You need to present the stimulus, the selective perception. You need to provide learning guidance, which is systematic encoding, which we'll talk a lot about that in learning theories and learning styles. We're going to be eliciting performance. We want them to respond. We want them to do something. We're going to be providing feedback. So we're going to be reinforcing what we hear back from them and vice versa. So there's going to be an interaction. There's going to be a retrieval, assessing performance, and then obviously enhancing retention and transfer generations. So these are the 9 events that we're going to be talking about. The first one is conditioning of learning, and there are different instructions require different types of learning outcomes. If I'm a mechanic, doing one type of thing, replacing an engine is something totally different than if I'm coding. So you need to understand that. The events of learning operations that constitutes the level or conditioning of learning. Does the learner have the mindset? Are they in a receptive methodology or receptive format for learning the specific types of techniques or items you're teaching them? Is the instructional event, are they different for different types of learning outcomes? So you think about it again, if my learning outcome is to teach a 5-year-old how to throw a ball versus teach an 18-year-old how to hit a curve, there's different levels of outcomes, expected outcomes. And then there's learning hierarchical definitions or intellectual skills that need to be learned in a sequence of instruction, scaffolding, and certain terminology that we're going to talk about in terms of how you develop, how you pace and develop your learning materials. Consideration for adult learners. Are they ready? I can't emphasize this enough. This is a major component in my mind. Okay. Is the learners ready to receive the information? Do they have sufficient skills? If I'm starting to talk to a group of trainees about what happened in World War II, and they have no idea that there even was a World War II because of their background or whatever, then that's not going to work. So I need to make sure that they have the background skills. I need to make sure that they see a level of a need for the learning. I guess is a good way of putting it. I think that's important for them to realize and say, yes, I want to learn this. If you have an individual that comes to a training class and has absolutely no interest in what you're training them on, or doesn't believe that you have the qualifications for training them, are they going to get anything out of that? So you need to make sure that you are aware of that and that you communicate that piece of it. How will it affect their daily lives or their daily jobs? That's critical because adult learners, especially adult learners, when you're in college, you tend to say, well, I have to learn this for a class, so it's no big deal. But for an adult learner, there's a direct correlation of what I'm learning and the implications of what I'm learning, and how will that impact my job or my task or the things that I'm doing. Is there practical practice? Is there hands-on activities? Is there real life scenarios that I can really relate to? That cross relationship is critical. One way you can achieve that, depending upon what type of class it is by participation. You can encourage direction or discussion. You can ask questions, but how you think about different ways of getting folks to interact with one another. And we'll talk about some of that in a few minutes as well. And then relating to some training, something that they know. Again, as we've already said, that is an excellent point. Building rapport. in my mind, it's critical. If I'm doing a training session, I go ahead of time. And I would encourage all of you to go ahead of time, get set up so that all the setup, I'm not worried about anything, any of the materials and everything from a technology standpoint, all set up. So that way, then as the trainees start to come in, I can talk with them. I can learn their names. I can see where they're coming from and ask inquiry questions. I can communicate a little bit about me that they're going to want to know to be more receptive in that regard. Okay, so I think that's really important to make that first impression, that quality first impression. And I'm going to re-emphasize that the building rapport, the mingling with the trainees when they first come in is just so critical, especially if you're new to the company or new to that group and you haven't met them yet. Getting to know them, asking them, do they have kids? Do their kids play sports if they have kids? What do they do? People like to tell you things about themselves. So provide them the opportunity. Don't cut them off. Let them do the talking as you start to talk with them so you can gain an appreciation. Now, the key component of this that I think is really critical is that gives you the opportunity to start engaging or altering your presentation to the things you've learned about them, because then they're going to be more receptive to what you're training them on. Introduce yourself. That's a key component, obviously. But more so, why should they listen to you? Why do they care? What's important about you, or what skill sets do you have that would make them want to learn something that you're trying to communicate to them, that you're adding value to them? If you've got, and we'll talk more about it later on in terms of humor, short stories, make audience think, icebreakers, invite participation. All of those are attention getters, attention getters, and building rapport. That's extremely critical to do. As it relates to humor, and I'll say it again later on, some people can tell a joke and some people cannot. You need to be aware if you can do that or not. If you're not a good joke teller, then don't try to do it. Okay. But if you are a good joke teller, then go ahead and if the audience is right, go ahead and do that. Use icebreakers, and we'll talk about icebreakers later on. But use an icebreaker to get the group interacting. That's a key component for building interaction, and especially if the attendees are from different parts of the company or different groups that may or may not know one another. And then get audience's response. As I said, icebreakers are frequent. It helps them get to know one another. It relieves tension. When people come to a training session, they're going to, they may know why they're there. They may be there because their boss told them to be there. And so they're not sure, are they going to be graded on it? Are they going to have tests? So you need to relieve some of the tension and talk about what your plans are. Okay, how you're going to go back through the process, and how you can help them walk through what you're going to be doing and how they can apply that to their everyday jobs. Is completing the agenda, as I said, have an agenda. Adult learners want to know what's going to happen and when. They want to be in control of their environment. So if you can tell them that at 9 o'clock, we're going to have a break, we're going to go to lunch at 12, then you tell them that. But be sure you do that, and make sure that you hit those benchmarks, even if it means you need to cut something off a little bit early and come back to it after the break or after the lunch, but so that they know that what you say you really mean in terms of that piece of it. If you are looking at a persuasive type of situation, then you need to define what the problem is, who cares, and what the solution is, and talk about that solution, and talk about that solution mix, and talk about the who cares, because that's critical to understand in terms of who's putting the emphasis on why you're attending those sessions. the main point, transition, main point, transmission. This is just a technique of bouncing back and forth between one item and then in a transition discussion and another item. What this does is this helps and alleviates some anxiety for the user or the learners in that regard. Where possible, give supporting evidence. Supporting evidence can be something from your background or a situation that you're aware of that you're talking about, from the company you're with or prior experiences. Those supporting evidence and examples are critical for people because that will help draw the trainees out. Well, they'll start asking, or they can provide that same type of activity or examples as you go through that, and then that'll make it better for everybody and more informative. Positive reinforcement. Have you ever been to a training session that no matter what was said, it was always good job, nicely done, nicely done? So you don't know if your benchmark was it really nicely done, or is he just saying that? Or is he or she just giving me feedback, common feedback, because they think that's what I want? So think about what your style is. What do you appreciate? Do you appreciate being told, nice job? And then if you don't hear anything, you're naturally going to apply that, well, maybe I could have done better. Okay. So you think about, you want to provide positive reinforcement, but you think about the frequency of positive reinforcement. And along that line, you don't want to give positive reinforcement. If you've got a trainee group of 10 people, you don't want to tell one person nicely done consistently and not tell it to everybody else. That will just create more problems for you, because then that'll develop a methodology of trust or non-trust. Think about non-formal or non-verbal and verbal reinforcers. And those are things that you can do throughout the training session that will help get folks engaged with it. Use of examples, and we've talked a little bit about this. You don't want your whole presentation to be on examples, but you want to try to give as many examples as possible, because I think that offers the trainee a direct correlation to, here's topic A and here's an example. Here's topic B, here's an example. So there's a correlation there that the trainees can adapt to and understand. And when you're answering questions, first, you need to anticipate the questions before they're asked, wherever possible. And you need to be aware as a trainer that whatever question you ask of the trainees, you're going to get the answer that they think the question's for, not necessarily the answer you want, but the answer you think the question's for. So you need to be aware of that. You need to listen and with full concentration, because you want to make sure that you fully understand what the question is. You want to acknowledge the question and give it a minute to sink in, and then repeat the question back, because that way you make sure you are giving them the right answer to the question they're asking. Okay. If you need to clarify it or say, I'm not sure, that's okay. Tell them that and say, I'll get back to you. And then after break or after lunchtime, you get back to the group. Okay. Show that you feel the question. If the question is not appropriate, don't just slap them down, so to speak, verbally, but walk around it and then come back to it. And you do that by diverting the question and start talking about other topics to reinforce that and say, you'll come back. Let's come back to that in a few minutes. Okay. Wherever possible, if you've got multiple questions or on the same topic, combine them into one answer. That will expedite your time frame for giving answers back. Okay. And the last one is don't argue. Don't put a questionnaire down and don't argue. If you can't reach a resolution where the questioner is happy or satisfied with the response, say, okay, we'll agree to disagree, but let's talk about it at break to have more conversations. Think about higher ordering questions. I know that when I first went through training on I say higher order questions, what are you talking about? And think about it. They're open-ended questions. They're questions that allow comparisons. So what you're wanting to do is you're trying to avoid yes and no questions, because that doesn't promote conversation or discussion. So if you can stay away from a yes or no, is the sky blue? That's yes or no. Whereas, or you could say, well, what color is the sky at 5 o'clock in the afternoon? They can say, well, it's blue, but it could be this. And it promotes further conversations or further discussion. So you need to think about how you can use open-ended questions for that piece of it. You can also allow for higher-ended questions where you have a variety of correct answers, almost like multiple choice type formats, where you can answer that and then combine that in that general sequence. And that allows for more conversation, because the whole issue why you're allowing questions or working on questions is to have more conversation within the group and have the group help self-answer the questions themselves. When you're concluding the presentations, inform the audience that you're about to close. When you start a presentation, you tell them, this is what we're going to learn today. You're going to go through the materials, and at the end, this is what you've learned today. And it's very important to summarize the main reports. It's very important if there's a call to action that you tell them that. So this is what you've learned now we need to go out and do this. Okay, so those are the types of things you need to think about when you're conducting or concluding your presentation. The closure obviously is, as I just said, remind the participants of what they learned. Ask them to reflect on what they've done. You can do that a variety of ways. You can have surveys or other types of things. You can have a closing worksheet that says, I wish I knew more. One of the classes that I teach, the last thing the students have to do is to write a one-page paper on what they wish I would have gone over that I didn't for one reason or another. So that's something that you can think about doing, because that will help you in the next one. And then also, if you close it in the morning and then come back in the afternoon, you can use that as a kickoff or an icebreaker for a new activity in the afternoon. Okay. Remind them to act on new knowledge or to act on new information. So if you're teaching a programming course, remind them, or Excel or whatever, say, okay, now you learned A, B, C, D, now go out and do it. Let's see what happens the next time you try to use that technology or use that tool. So these are just a few of the items. They're broken down into 9 and then 4 components that you can go through and look at giving presentations. We're going to go into another format in just a minute.